Hello, this is Dylan here. I'm going to present just a quick presentation that I'll be presenting in Phoenix. This is actually on Cole Hamels' trade scenarios. As Cole Hamels is unhappy in the Phillies network, he would like to be traded to a winning team. So in this case study, we were asked to analyze two potential trade scenarios that would be attractive to the Phillies and to the partners that they would be trading with, that would allow the team that they would be trading to be pushed in contention and the Phillies an optimal future return. So to do this, we had a four-step process, which was first was finding qualifying teams. Then we had to project Hamels' future, then find prospects. And then lastly, we attempted to use a best search algorithm to analyze trade scenarios between potential teams. So first, we had to decide who can benefit from Hamels' wins, and to do this, we used qualifying teams. So a team that would qualify would be one who would be close to making the playoffs, one who would be close to making the World Series, and generally we decided that this was about 83 wins. And this is because a team who would acquire Hamels would gain about 4.5 wins, which would be about 85 minus 4.5 is about 83. We also use win curves to see what the revenue impact and the attendance impacts would be on the teams who would acquire him. So for an example of a win curve, the Yankees have a pretty great looking win curve. From 70 wins, their attendance is poor, but as the wins increase, as you approach 100, they almost double. But after 100, there is a marginal rate of, or there's less than a rate of return, which means that there's actually fans who you won't gain many fans by having 110 or 116 wins. While the season will be great, the marginal return is lower. And you can see this with the marginal revenue, that as you reach 106 wins, there is no benefit to winning anymore. So teams who made the cut were the Angels, Athletics, Blue Jays, Cardinals, Dodgers, Giants, Indians, Mariners, Nationals, Orioles, Pirates, Royals, Tigers, Yankees, Cubs, and Red Sox. It's almost half the league. So we have to narrow it down some way, and to do that we started looking at positional need. So the main question is, who needs starting pitching? And to do this, we looked at the sum of the top rotation WAR, which this means we just looked at the top 4 pitchers, the starting pitchers. We used a league mean plus 1 standard deviation. And the league mean was 8.34 and the standard deviation was 2.6. So teams who had about 10 or above about 10.5 wins did not make the cut. And these would be teams like the Nationals, who just signed Max Scherzer, and I can't actually remember the other couple teams, but quite a few teams made it. And as you can see, the teams on the right were the ones who did. Now we looked at payroll. So how we analyzed this was we actually took strategies straight from stock trading, which was moving averages and Bollinger Bands, and then also analyzed the luxury tax threshold and the implications of the salary tax. So for example, graphically, as you can see, the dotted lines are the Bollinger Bands, the gray dotted line is a moving average, and the red bold line is the salary tax threshold. For the Cubs increased their spending from 2000 to 2010, and it generally tracked their 2-year moving average, so they spent at a steady rate, never really deviating far from it. However, in 2009 and 2010, they began to cut their salary and have actually been below their 2-year moving average ever since. So they've been spending less and less money. We think this is because this is a rebuilding period for the Cubs. They've been pretty poor, and until recently they haven't really been signing any new talent. They've been developing it within their own system. On the other hand, if we look at someone like the Dodgers, this is another extreme. The Dodgers tracked about a $100 million payroll for years, until 2012 when there's a change in ownership. And as you can see, their payroll spending skyrocketed, and it almost crossed their trailing moving average of on the Bollinger Band. What this means, as you approach the Bollinger Band, we believe that a team becomes over-payrolled. So for instance, this moving average idea comes into play. However, if you look, they also have crossed the salary tax threshold. And this is a problem because if they're going to sign a new player, it has to be at a lower salary. And we don't think that there would be the ability to payroll another player like Cole Hamels, who has a a contract of $22.5 million. So we have this updated team checklist, and we begin to narrow down this team selection. And lastly, we look at this farm system strength. So how did we analyze the minor league system? We looked at the top 100 prospects and organized them into tier structures. So for instance, there were 2 tier 1 players, and only one of the teams that we were analyzing had players within their system. This was Chris Bryant with the Cubs. In the tier 2, there was only 3 players within our systems that we were looking at, and so on. And as you go down the tiers, there becomes more. But this gives an idea of who we'll be able to select from when we go to analyze prospects and trade with a team. So again, we analyzed this is just kind of a better visualization of how strong a team is. And what we did was multiply the tier by the number of players in that tier. And as you can see, with a score of 595, the Cubs have a phenomenal farm system. We decided to cut off the teams at 300. Below 300 teams were generally had players ranked within tier 4, 5, and 6, and we didn't believe that these were the most eligible prospects that we would like to pick from. So now we have this finalized team checklist, and our trade eligible teams are the Blue Jays, the Orioles, the Cubs, and the Red Sox. So now we can move on to forecasting Cole Hamels. So first we have to look at Cole Hamels today. He has a 3-year beta of 0.74. He ranks 8th among starting pitchers and a 1-year beta of 0.95. So what this beta idea means is actually he pitches more innings pitched, and he has more starts and not missed starts than most pitchers in the league. And this is a really good sign because he's consistent. And to us, it's a low risk factor. However, he does have some risk because he has been reporting arm problems. So we need to find how he's going to age. And for this, we use similarity scores to find comparable players. The similarity scores resulted in pitchers like Kevin Napier, Greg Sondell, John Lackey, John Smiley, Matt Cain, Mark Gwizdka, Alex Fernandez, and Brad Radke, Jake Peavy. We took these players and we graphed them and their individual aging curves. We believe that this was a decent representation of the players at hand. So Cole has been very consistent, though. We wanted to factor this in. Besides his year 22C season, which was partial, he has been averaging between 3.5 and 4.5 WAR each year. Again, he's a low beta pitcher and he has low risk, and we think that there's a high chance that he would be able to pitch well into his 30s. So now we can go and project his future using a Marcel projection with an aging factor kicker based on our aging curves. We think that with the projected WAR for 2015 will be about 3.93, and in 2016 it will fall about 0.2, and actually after that for about 0.2. However, the surplus value is dangerously low. There's no room for variance or injury or increased risk. This is risk that the new team would be taking on. So, we believe that this might be an implication that the Phillies may have to pay a team to take Hamels onto their roster. Lastly, we can project the prospects. So using a sample of Baseball Prospectus's top 100 prospects, we analyze the players and their chance of making it to the MLB and the resulting WAR in 5 years. This was statistically significant within the 99th% confidence interval. Using this data, we created a probit regression using rank to estimate WAR in 5 years. This probit regression results are shown. As you can see, a rank 1 player has a 77% chance of making the MLB with a WAR with a WAR of 0. They might have a negative WAR, which would mean they still made the MLB, but they just were not productive. We focused on generally year 10. 10 10 was a good year because it averages about 2 WAR per season, and we think that's a fairly respectable return for a player. So now we analyzed our current prospects and calculated their WAR probabilities. As you can see, Chris Bryant, Addison Russell, the tier 1 and 2 players, are have very high percentages and would probably be the best ones to pick. So using these probabilities and these estimates of what the WAR could be in the future, we began to select our trades. We used Booleans to mark players who were unlikely to trade. These would be players who were just signed by a team, or had just been traded, or were in the short-term plans of the team. Once we had our data, we attempted to develop an algorithm, and this algorithm would maximize the best offer by visiting each node in a graph and use tier heuristics. So the tier heuristics idea would be that if Cole Hamels was a pitcher who had already made the MLB and had a WAR of 3, we would relatively guess what a current tier player would be compared to Cole Hamels, or what their value would be. So for instance, our score system would be out of 100. If Cole Hamels would be 100, then we might think that Addison Russell, a tier 1 player, would be a 75. And a player who was a tier 2 player might be a 60. And a tier 3 player might be a 50, and so on. So a tier 4 might be 4, a tier 3 might be 2.5, and a tier 6 might be 1.7. Using this data, we would visit each node and develop a trading scenario which maximized, or which was the highest and closest to Cole Hamels' value of 10. So for instance, we could match up Chris Bryant with a tier 4 player who might be a 2.5, and that would equal 10. Or we could match up a player who might be a tier 5, which is a score of, say, 1.7, with a player who is a tier 2, which is 6, and maybe one more player who might be a tier 7. Using this, we would select the best scenario simply by having the optimized return. So for trade 1, we had the Cubs. The Cubs would acquire Cole Hamels the Cubs would acquire Cole Hamels and Chase Utley and $6 million in cash, while the Phillies would acquire Addison Russell, Travis Wood, and Chris Coughlin. We believe that the addition of Chase Utley, an older player, however, a very productive player, would be beneficial to the Cubs and would sweeten the trade and the risk of Cole Hamels. Meanwhile, the Phillies would acquire top talent in Addison Russell, Travis Wood, and Chris Coughlin. And if we assess these players, Russell has a beta of 1.4, Wood of 0.9, and Coughlin of 1.8, which is higher risk to the Phillies, while the Cubs have a low risk trade. The second trade would be the Red Sox would acquire Hamels, Carlos Rios, and $6 million in cash. The Phillies would acquire Eduardo Rodriguez, Manuel Margot, and Christian Vasquez. And again, assessing the trade, the risk of the players of the Phillies, when using this beta idea, would be fairly high. These guys are riskier assets, and Margot is an unestablished player altogether. The risk of the players of the Red Sox would be fairly low. Ruiz is slightly above the league average, but it's not a very risky scenario as Hamels is still a .74. So, in conclusion, I'd just like to thank you guys for watching, and wish me luck on my presentation over Thursday. Thank you.